Welcome to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast, where we provide constant improvement to businesses through timely, actionable financial solutions. Do you want answers to your financial questions? Email us at bsp@kaizencpas.com. I'm your host, Mark Valesky. Now let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Kaizen Time. I'm joined by Clay Hamlin, a partner here at the firm. How you doing, Clay?
Good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
Super.
There are a lot of red flags in business, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's internal, external, but let's say you're looking outside your business and you're saying, hey, this looks like a good option. Are there some red flags that you should be looking at beforehand before you pull the trigger?
Sure. So I think what you're getting at is like, if I have a business and I want to, I'm thinking about expanding it and there's another, or maybe going vertically integrated. There's another business here that I might want to put into my puzzle.
Yep.
Yeah, there's definitely some red flags on this one that I could talk about.
Is this from personal experience?
Oh yeah.
You're like, yeah, maybe some of them.
Well, I bought 13 firms, so yeah, I have some experience in this one.
Oh, wow. 13.
Yeah. And merged one. So
Okay.
one of those is, let's say, for example, you run a restaurant and you're a white table restaurant.
Okay.
And
Very
you're
fancy.
Yeah, fancy stuff. And you're like, okay, let's merge this one in, or let's buy this. You may not be all that great at running, say, a fast food or a chain sub-restaurant type of thing, right? And it might actually make your whole operation more cumbersome, because you're set up to run this way, and this business needs to run somewhat differently.
Okay.
And that can be a challenge to mix those two things together. Another one is a business owner who's running it kind of poorly,
Okay.
and they say, "Hey, Mark, I want this price, but you can do so much better. You can make this you're great at this stuff." In other words, you should pay a high price to make
this thing better
that I couldn't run, make it better. You run such a great business. I've run it. I can't tell you how many times the former owner has said, "You can make you can raise prices. You can." You have so much experience and do this so much better, and I'm sitting there going, "This is the biggest
You are being sold something.
Yeah, this is the biggest load I've ever heard in a long time." Don't expect that you will be able, in any sort of short-term time frame, be able to run this better than what the former owner could run it.
Now, that said, there are situations where that is possible, but again, that's not a guarantee. It's a risk.
Sure. So like, for example, in the ones I've worked with, right? The employees that are coming with it, they think, oh, now we can get more money.
Okay.
The clients feel, oh, we're going to be charged a lot more money, so maybe we should look elsewhere. While you may have some synergies and some size, that does not always translate off. In fact, my experience has been the first couple of years is a challenge to not make it worse.
Well, there's an integration period, right? Whenever there's change, there's ruffle and feathers.
Right. So I may have like some savings on say software, or maybe some personnel duplication doesn't need to happen. But actually running that business is harder than running your own in many ways, because you're picking up, if they didn't run it very poorly, you're picking up one that was poorly run.
Yep.
And there's this book called The Power of Habit.
Okay.
And I've mentioned in a different Kaizen Time video. You might want to look at that one if you have time. And I mentioned it briefly, but the habits of those employees are not necessarily the habits that you want, because it was in a business that was poorly run, and so their reflex isn't what you want. Their sort of go-to methods, and you're fighting something that's very hard to overcome, which is a habit. And
actually, I want to piggyback off that. My brother has to travel. He lives on the East Coast. He has to travel to Illinois every month to go into a factory that they sold off or that they acquired.
Yep.
And it was poorly run, and he has to go there every month to make sure they're doing what basically his company is doing.
Sure.
They're the one that is successful is trying to apply these new standards to this other less successful business.
Yep.
And that takes work. In many ways, it'd almost be easier if they just went on business and they just started a new one, right?
Yep. Is
that what you're going to tell me? You're going to suggest?
Well, I'll give you another point to consider. And that is to really do the numbers, right? You get, when you're offered a business, really look at that and say, does this cash flow as is? Does the deal cash flow as is? And if it doesn't, I wouldn't. You might think, well, I could run it better. I could have all these savings. Those first 2 or 3 years are going to be much harder, and it might actually be worse than what you thought it was, than what the former owner was doing. Mm-hmm. And then maybe afterwards, you'll be able to accomplish that goal of acquiring it and getting that cash flow. Can you live through that? Right? So if this is sucking cash flow from your great business, you've now dragged down the great business, and this thing is taking a ton of your time. Can you live through that? Can your spouse live through that? I mean, these are all questions, and do the numbers. Don't just go, well, I think maybe this will work.
Don't just spitball it. Really get in there.
Yeah, don't spitball it. It's not super hard to run the numbers. Because you usually, and I say usually, the former owner has like a tax return or something you can use that will actually give you some idea of how that business is being run, and they'll pull out things. They'll quote unquote normalize those financials. They'll say, oh, well, if you pull out my wages and you pull out my car and you pull out my health insurance and you pull out the electric I was running from my home through the business, blah blah blah. You pull all these things out. Look how profitable this business is.
Okay. Interesting.
It's called normalizing the finance, and I get it.
Yep.
The issue becomes, are you going to run both businesses, or are you going to hire a manager? And if you hire that manager, you need those wages again. And so you have to be very careful, and you need to plan thoroughly when you're looking at this and saying, how is this thing going to cash flow? Do I have enough bank financing, for example, to get me through those first 2 or 3 years, to get through that hump? Because it could be a lot tougher than you might think it would be.
Wow. What else? What are some other red flags?
Some other red flags when you're acquiring a business is to think about if it's a different kind of business. So, let's say you're going vertically.
Okay.
Instead of adding to the bulk of one business, you're trying to vertically integrate a chain.
Sure.
What do I know about this business? At one point, I bought and operated a mail order business as well, and
there's a lot about you that I'm learning right now.
I didn't know the first thing about it. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
I learned a lot, but to do that, I had to kind of stop running the accounting firm and have others do that for about 2 years while I was learning how to run a mail order business and understand that business. And so if you're trying to attempt to run a different kind of business, it's going to take a lot of time for you to understand, get to know the vendors, get to know how this market works. It's a lot more time consuming than you might think at first. And can your existing cash cow absorb that? Do you have the people lined up? Do they know what's coming at them, which is they're basically going to be running the business, while you're out doing something else?
Okay.
Might be a good way to see how solid your own business is.
Maybe you take a little vacation beforehand, make sure everything's working good before you try it.
That's a thing, sure. But they need to understand what's coming at them, because after a couple of months of you're being gone most of the time, might be like, hey, how come you're hardly ever around?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be clear in your intentions about what you want to do.
Okay. Anything else you want to throw in? Some other red flags?
Yeah, be careful of pressure. The old, this is available for the next 24 hours.
The used car salesman kind of tactics.
Right.
Yeah.
Be careful of fees. Although I will say, over the past couple of years, several of our clients have sold for in the millions and millions of dollars.
That's great to hear.
And they hired a broker who charged a lot of fees, but they got a lot more money than they ever thought they would. So the fees aspect of it, like a brokerage or an advisor, can be worth it to both sides, or not. If you get someone who's good, they're typically worth it.
Well, and I know we've talked about this on previous podcasts. There is that, the broker is going to help you, right? They get your business where it needs to be. So, it can be sold because everyone wants it to be worth what it is.
Right. And they're usually on the sell side. But we also see advisors on the buy side.
Really?
Sure. Well, over the past 10 years, it's deals today are different than the deals 10 years ago.
10 years ago, weren't they just shaking hands and over a couple grand?
They were. And now, the last few years, we've seen a number of complex transactions. I'm not going to go through them here. It's way beyond the scope of this. But they're much more complex and involve what's called a reorganization. And that is done typically by the buyer's advisors.
Okay.
And it's trying to maximize dollars and trying to maximize the seller's exit strategy, so that the buyer gets the owner either involved or ties their hands to make sure that the deal works for at least the short term. So there's reasons for doing this, but some of these advisors today, I'm surprised by the complexity of the transactions they're bringing to the table, and many of them work quite well.
Well, I mean, it's laying groundwork, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being prepared.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
One last thing I would say,
please,
is when you're buying a business, you're looking if you possibly can find hidden liabilities. And I've brought this up in other podcasts as well. When you're looking at a business, look at their state's activities, and the taxation of states has changed a lot in the last 5 years. There's a lot more hidden liabilities out there, like they're selling into Missouri or something like that, and they've sold enough that requires them to file either sales taxes or income and sales taxes, and they're not. Later on, that can bite the buyer in the butt.
So yeah, those are things you want to have it audited, more or less.
Well, your agreement wants to cover. What we're seeing is in the agreements, they're saying if one of these things happens, seller, you are going to be covering that.
Gotcha. You want to have that type of coverage then?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clay.
Thanks, Mark.
You've been listening to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave a 5-star review. This podcast has been brought to you by Kaizen CPAs Plus Advisors, providing advisory and accounting services to help you grow your business. Learn more at kaizencpas.com or email us at bsb@kaizencpas.com.